Welcome to the Church in Action podcast. I'm your host, Brittany Feldott, a board member of Vision New England, and today we are flipping the script to interview our very own president, Charles Galda. We're going to be talking about the rich history of our organization, including when and how it got started, its most recent evolution, some of the things that God's done through it in history, and what it's up to today. So, Charles, thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Brittany.
My pleasure. Charles, first thing I want to say just off the bat, I'm really excited about this episode because as being kind of like a younger member of Vision New England, when I first got involved, there was a lot of the history that I just wasn't aware of. So for people out there who are maybe joining more recently or new to the organization in any way, there's so much incredible history for Vision New England, and I think it's kind of fun for people to get some insight into it if they're not familiar. So thank you for doing this, and I'm psyched to hear what you have to share.
Thank you for doing it, Brittany.
Of course. So maybe just to get us started, do you want to just tell us about the kind of story of VNE's founding? How did it get started?
So, and I'll drop in some of the names of churches and people who were involved in it where we know that, the bane of small nonprofits is you lose a lot of your history. We're fortunate that we do have a good chunk of it, but we are missing lots of it too. But we were formed in 1887 by 12 Boston area business leaders and A.J. Gordon, and incorporated as the Evangelistic Association of New England, which is still technically our name. We just go by Vision New England. It got changed in maybe the 90s, I think it was. And so always had this heart for evangelism. I have the first meeting of the association of people who were interested. I have seen the invitations that went out to people, that say we're having this meeting. If you're interested in evangelism, I forget the exact words, join us here at Tremont Temple in Boston, which many people know is beautiful, beautiful building. Park Street was heavily represented in that early group. And we, of course, A.J. Gordon, Gordon College, Gordon Conwell, right? So big connections there. So sister ministries. And one of the earliest things we would do is we would bring Dwight Moody into Boston to do these big, in our tradition, we call them revivals. I'm not sure what they might have called them, but these big revival meetings in Boston and bring thousands and thousands of people to Boston. And Tremont Temple was actually built to house the Dwight Moody events that we were doing.
Okay.
And now I don't know which manifestation of it because Tremont Temple has had several fires in its history. So I'm not sure if I don't know if it's the most recent manifestation or an earlier one, but Tremont Temple was built to house Dwight Moody events that we were doing.
That's incredible. So yeah, some names that people probably immediately recognize. Wait, so just to clarify, how did it jump from a couple of partners sending out invitations to thousands gathering for these revivals or meetings?
Yeah, well, Dwight Moody was a big name back then, and and he made. There are other people who know more about than I do, but he's making itinerant preacher type trips around New England, and so we're then publicizing these meetings in Boston media and telling churches about it, and so that original group became a bigger network, and so the original board was these 12 men. Because of course it was 1887, but it grew well beyond that with lots of other churches and people being interested, and it was easy to find information. Back then, right? I don't know if the Boston Globe was around, but publications like the Boston Globe would talk about Dwight Moody is coming next week, and so you would find that they don't cover that kind of stuff today anymore. But back then, that was normal.
Wow, that's incredible. And you said you've seen the original invitations, like the physical ones, or you have?
The physical ones are at Gordon Conwell. So at some point in our history, I couldn't tell you when, we donated our papers to Gordon Conwell. And so they're in their library. Their librarian was nice enough to digitize it for me. I contacted them looking for our original bylaws just out of curiosity one time. And they sent me that with a couple of other things like the original call of our first meeting.
Wow, that is incredible. I'm so glad that those are kind of saved for history. It's a long time ago.
Yeah.
That's incredible. What an amazing start. So what did it do after it kind of got off the ground? What did it do in its early days, and who are some of the early partners?
Well, so, the next big name evangelist for sure was Billy Sunday. So not as well known as a Dwight Moody or a Billy Graham, but certainly very well known in his day, and by many people even today. And we have a board member whose father got saved at a Billy Sunday revival over 100 years ago, which is just a neat history for her to have with us. But we would send evangelists out into the lumber camps of the northern New England states. Have all the woods are, the northern parts of the states is the woods. And so there's lumber camps up there, and we're sending evangelists up there. There are rural communities there's just not enough pastors to go around. We're looking into a future where there's not enough pastors to go around. Well, that's in our past too. And so they would send evangelists out into rural communities, and there'd be communities that hadn't had a pastor even pass through in 3 years. And so they would stop in and they'd preach a series of messages and then move on to the next town. And we have in the old minutes of Vision New England, you can see where we're seeing almost here's Evangelist A, spent 75 cents on gas in the last 2 months, and driving their cars around New England doing that kind of stuff. We sent evangelists into the hospitals, specifically in Boston, but elsewhere, I think, as well. We would send them down to the docks to talk to the guys working on the docks. We had what was called a gospel wagon that would show up on the Common every Sunday, and we'd preach in the Common. And so there's always this heart for evangelism in everything we were doing in those early days.
Wow, that's incredible. So it starts with these kind of first gatherings are just drawing churches, and then churches just catch the vision for this and wanting to send out people into wherever it's needed. Yeah. I like the idea of you said it was a gospel wagon.
Yep. It picture a little like the old horse-drawn milk wagon.
Yeah. Yeah.
Picture one like that, only it says the gospel on the side and evangelistic association. And so we don't have a picture of the actual one. I've seen enough others that's probably what it looks like. Yeah. You try and find stuff like that in history, and so much of it is lost. But we have the recording of in our minutes and reports about that happening.
Well, that's incredible. I don't know what the modern equivalent of that would be, like the gospel Tesla or something, but somebody should be recording that for...
Yeah, something on Instagram, probably.
Yeah, probably. And that is in our minutes. So there you go. 100 years from now, that's what they'll be talking about. Yeah. All right, cool. What were some of the other kind of impactful things that the Evangelistic Association, Vision New England, was doing at that time?
Well, I think where you really start to see us prominently, so we're building out this network and working with churches and ministries and a lot of marketplace leaders. We had much heavier marketplace involvement in those years.
Really?
But in the 50s, we're Billy Graham's partner. So we invite Billy Graham to come up to do New England Crusades. And he comes up here and he does that. And a guy by the name, if you listen to our other historical episode, a guy by the name of Don Gill is mentioned prominently. Don was for, I guess, 20 plus years was in my role at Vision New England, although it was still EANE, or the Evangelistic Association back then. But Don traveled with Billy all over New England, seeding the ground and figuring out how we would do something like this, and then brought him up, and they did the Crusades. And I don't know exactly how many they did and what places they did them. I know they did one in Boston. I'm pretty confident there was one in Hartford. I don't know all the locations, but they did a number of Crusades. I believe one in Portland. And then again in the 80s, they do it again. And Billy Graham comes back up, and so I picked the wrong time to be in this role. I should have been in the role back when Don Gill was, so I could be Billy Graham, right? But Don, and of course Don was great, still is greatly loved in New England, because there's still a lot of people around when Don Gill was here, and that really became this. It was out of that the Congress on Evangelism started, or what became known as Congress.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so tell us a little bit about that, because if you've joined Vision New England, as kind of a more recent member of Vision New England, I've heard a lot of people talk about Congress, but it was before my time. So tell us a little bit about that. What was Congress?
And given our political environment, nobody wants to go anything called Congress, right? It's a terrible name.
The branding has shifted.
but it has. And so Congress really starts at, without that name, but it really starts at Grace Chapel. And so, and Gordon MacDonald is there at the time.
Oh, wow.
And and basically they're starting to bring together so people who were involved in the Billy Graham stuff started to come together periodically, and that started growing from, I forget, the initial one was maybe a couple of hundred, and then over time it was getting bigger and bigger, and then Steve Macchia comes in, and so Don decides to retire while it's growing, and Steve comes in. And I think it was Steve who then decided we were going to have it in Boston because we just outgrown Grace Chapel at that point, or at some point we'd outgrown Grace Chapel and needed to do it elsewhere, and wound up in Boston at the Heinz Center, although it wasn't the Heinz Center back then. But anyway, wound up there, and that starts to grow and grow and grow and becomes thousands of people. And so I've heard estimates as high as 10,000. I've heard 6,000, but it was thousands. And it was one of the early movers on the big Christian conference circuit that becomes that. And so that's before, Willow Creek had one. It's before Saddleback had one, right? Because it's all predating those guys. And I asked Gordon MacDonald one time, because Gordon's still very involved in Vision New England's work, as you know. But I asked him who came to Congress, because you lose that history with something like that, or at least we've lost that history. And I'd been putting together a list of names that people would say, oh, I remember seeing so-and-so. And so we know people like Gordon and Clive Calver, right? So some folks will know Clive from World Relief and the Evangelical Alliance of the UK, Johnny Erickson, Rick Warren, Bill Hybels, Tony Evans. I asked Gordon, I said, who do you remember? And he said, it'd be easier to answer who wasn't at Congress, because everybody came to Congress. And now I found out that's not 100% true.
Not everyone was there.
Because not a lot of people know this, but Chuck Swindoll, his first pastorate was in Massachusetts. Oh. If I remember right, it's Waltham. Not a lot of people know that. And by his own account, it did not go well. And he left and said, I'm not coming back to New England. And as best we can tell, he didn't. If he came back, it wasn't for us. Because Steve Macchia was
not at Congress.
Yeah, Steve Macchia, because somebody had told me they remembered him from Congress. He was like, no, never came to Congress. And so he's the only name I found. Luis Palau was at Congress. A number of the Graham family was here for that. It really was. Professors from Dallas Seminary, who would be big name people like Dwight Pentecost, Howard Hendricks, so big names from well outside New England were coming and just having such a creating a very formative experience for a lot of people.
Well, that's incredible. So what you're telling me is that Vision New England was hosting this conference in a conference circuit before it was cool, because I heard you say before Saddleback, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, no, it does go back, and of course that was the seeds of why it had to go away. Because now Rick Warren comes and says, "Hey, this is great. We should do a conference." And Bill Hybels, I don't know if it was that clean a logic, but he goes, he does start doing his conference, and Willow Creek starts doing a conference, and all God's children do a conference, and now there's a lot of conferences out there, and it got pretty expensive doing it in Boston, as you can imagine, even back then. And so I've seen some letters of people writing letters to Steve Macchia saying, we love Congress, but it has just gotten way too expensive. And so it was a challenge. The economics were challenging. And so it had gotten to the point where it's just was the peak of starting to lose some money. Okay. And the attendance was just starting to turn. And that's when the board decided, at least, again, I'm piecing together history from people, but it sounded like we decided to take a break and say, we're not going to do it next year, but maybe the year after. And then the year after never happened, and a whole bunch of things started unwinding, just is probably the best way to say it.
Gotcha. That's still a really incredible story, and kind of what a beautiful season of life to kind of get this started, and then even inspire other places to be doing things like this, to bring together some incredible names and inspire local churches in that way. And so season comes to an end, but what an incredible chapter. And so when did it come to an end? What timeline wise? So
it had started when it got big. It was in the early 80s, and it ran through till the early 2000s. So 2002, 2003, our admin, who got saved at Congress in 2002 or 3. And so a great connection there for us. But it was when I started getting involved with Vision New England, Clive Calver and I, at the behest of the board, went around and just met with hundreds of leaders, or more than 100 leaders around New England. That's how I met folks at Cape Cod Church. And what we found and heard from people was at least a third of those would bring up Congress, not just from the perspective of, oh, yes, I went to Congress or I remember Congress, but grieving the absence of Congress. It was such a formative event for people. And it was a unifying event that it brought the church together in New England. And people connected and saw each other and learned and heard from these great speakers. It was encouraging and edifying. And right. So it was just, and in an era, and you have to remember, this is in a time that's pre-internet. So it's not like, well, I'll listen to Rick Warren. I don't need Congress to listen to Rick Warren. I'll just go home and listen on my own. It's like, or Chuck Swindoll, or take your pick. You couldn't do that. So if you wanted to hear those people, you needed to go someplace where they were going to be, and we were bringing them all in.
Gotcha. Yeah, so a time where you can't, nowadays you can just get whatever content you want. In fact, you can even attend conferences online, but what an incredible opportunity at that time.
And that's why, as much as people would conceptually love the return of Congress, the reality is it could never work because all that content is free online. And Boston has not gotten cheaper in the last 20 years. It's only gotten way more expensive.
Right.
And so, but there's people from those days who are still very much involved with our ministry. Of course, I mentioned Clive, who was key in the rebirthing of Vision New England back in 2017, 18, 19. Gordon MacDonald is still hugely influential around New England and in Vision New England, and has been great with us as a guest on the Church in Action many times. He's spoken at, you have the 25 groups affinity groups we lead for people based on what their role are. I'd be surprised if Gordon hadn't hit every one at this point because I told him I'm New England's equivalent of Bill Bright. I love you and I have a plan for your life. So Gordon, here's what I need you to do now. And so Johnny Erickson is still involved in our work too. She at Thrive Cape Cod and Thrive Farmington Valley, we've done sessions on disability. And one of the years, I guess it must have been 2020 because we ended up running it a year late because 2020 Thrive Cape Cod got turned into a virtual conference and shrunk in size because of COVID. But Liz Babbitt at Johnny and Friends New England had gotten a video from Johnny Erickson, Tata, to share at Thrive Cape Cod, where she mentioned my name. And so we had not met at that point. And so that was about the best day I'd had up till then. And it's among the top ones today that she doesn't know me, but she said my name, and that's all I need.
That is celebrity status.
And so a year later, we ran it, even though it was a year old, we ran it at Thrive Cape Cod anyway. I didn't care. We're using this.
Getting my name out there, yeah. I love that. Well, that's really incredible. We talk about kind of like evolutions of Vision New England in its past. And you see, one of the things that people loved so much about Congress was kind of this connection and the inspiration of seeing the church get together in one place. And now you're seeing still a lot of those same people connected just in different ways. And it may be in some ways more intimate ways while still maintaining that wide network across New England. We have these people kind of continuing to inspire pastors and smaller groups. And that's pretty incredible. So I don't know if you want to tell us a little bit about, so what happened after that? That's 2002 that Congress.
Yeah. And so there's even continuity with that. So Palau Ministries. So of course, Luis has passed away, but his family is still involved in the work we do here. So I love the continuity and the World Relief. Clive was a speaker at Congress when he ran World Relief. World Relief is still very involved in our work. They're a great partner with us, World Vision. So there's so many of these have been around for a long time that even though we went through this after Congress, we went through kind of a fallow period, if you will. But all of those relationships are still really vibrant. And there's probably ones I don't even know about that people still have that connection because they come up periodically where you find out that, oh, no, they used to do all this kind of stuff. And they know more about Vision New England than I do.
Yeah. That's really cool.
Yeah, but after Congress ended, the way I understand it is we had become a ministry that did a conference, and now we don't do that conference anymore. What do we do? And so we went through a series of new leaders, and each one came in and laid out a vision and a plan, and the board affirmed it. And they spent 3, 4, 5 years, however long they were here. And after each one, they would say that those were good results.
Yeah.
And so we liked what we were seeing, but we still didn't feel like this is what we're supposed to be doing.
Gotcha. And
so they took a few swings at that, but struggled with it. About why are we here? And really, Clive was the one who was so helpful in it, because for folks who don't know Clive Calver, he's just a very unusual person, to say the least, with an amazing background in history. So he's a church history guy. He's been all over the world, right? He worked for Billy Graham in the UK, knows everybody, right? John, stop, pick a name. He knows them. And just really just giving and generous with his time. And so what he pointed out to us is there's 3 kinds of associations that are evangelical, and we use that term as a theological term. It's taken on some baggage these days. But there's 3 kinds of evangelical associations in the world. The first are ones who are a bunch of old denomination guys sitting around talking about how great things used to be. He said they get nothing done. He said the second is what you are, which is a parachurch. And there's nothing bad about parachurches, but a typical parachurch will come up with a vision at the board level and then ask other people to help them do that. And there's a lot of really successful models of parachurch out there. But when your vision is evangelism in New England, you're guaranteed to come up with a vision way too big for anybody to do, including those churches that you're going to say, now, will you do our vision? And the reality of today's world is most of those churches will say, I got my own vision going right now, so I'm pretty busy. Yeah. And the ones that actually have an impact are the ones that say, what is God doing through you to the Big C church? What is God doing for you, and how can we help? And the board liked the way that sounded, and so said, that's great, help us do that. And Clive said, well, you need to go find out if anybody wants that. It's great that it works elsewhere. It's great that it sounds good on paper, but does anybody in New England want something like that?
Right.
And they said, well, how would we know? And he said, well, go talk to 100 leaders and find out. And they said, that's great. Will you do it? And so Clive, I was working with Clive. So we're at the same church, Walnut Hill down in Connecticut. And I was one of the elders working with him on his retirement from pastoral ministry. Mm-hmm. And so he agreed to do it and brought me along, and I figured I was helping him with his transition. Neither one of us knew he was helping me with my transition. I was a marketplace guy and I wasn't going into vocational ministry. Yeah. But we went around, talked to 100 leaders, and basically came in with a very vague concept of, are there some things that we could do better together than we do apart? And would you be willing to spend a day with your peers exploring what that might look like? And 100 said yes. And I always joke with people, I'm a Baptist, to get 100 of us to agree what day of the week it is a major move of God.
Yeah, something's going on here.
So we knew something, God was doing something in this. And we started bringing those folks together. And that led to a new set of bylaws, a new vision, a new mission, that really has been gaining traction over the last few years. And so that's it's just been great. And the beauty of it is that after we went through this rebirthing process, a lot of the board was so open-handed. They said, hey, if we're the right people to be the board, we're happy to be the board. If we're not the right people to be the board, we're happy to not be the board. Tell us what makes the most sense. And I can talk more about the model if you want, but with the model we're talking about, some of them were not the right folks to be on that board. All of them stayed engaged with the work we're doing. So there was nobody who said, okay, well, I'm going to pack up and go home. And there was nobody who said, well, you're not a good person. You should. It was all people who were like, I just care about the kingdom in New England. That's it.
Wow. That's an incredible point and part in history to kind of look and say, all right, things have changed a lot. Our world has changed a lot. How do we best serve the church in our region, the kingdom in our region, and to be kind of humble and willing to do what it takes? It's pretty incredible.
Yeah.
So Charles, maybe get us to today, because that's kind of, we're approaching recent history. Yeah. We're approaching the time when I first became familiar with Vision New England, so that's exciting for me. Because in 2002, during that kind of like transition period, I was in second grade, not to make you feel old, but getting closer and closer to my adult life. So tell us, what does Vision New England do today?
Well, just be careful, because it's going to seem like tomorrow, And you're going to be on this side of the table. I hate to tell you.
Probably true.
My father said one time, the days go by slowly, the years go by fast.
I like that.
And so, yeah. And so I'm like, he said it to my nephew, and I gave him a hard time. And you never said stuff like that to me. But I thought it's a great insight, as they do, but separate topic. Join us next Sunday at 2 p.m. on Life Changing Radio or wherever you stream your podcasts to hear the next episode. To support this program and accelerate evangelism, go to visionNewEngland.org and click on Donate, or click Member to become a partner with us. This program is supported by the Pastoral Association, who are dedicated to proclaiming the good news, uniting the church, and impacting cities worldwide.
At Leadership Transformations, we believe that when you have the right resources to help you slow down and experience a deep and refreshing connection to God, you can become the discerning leader you know you are created to be. Friends, Steve Macchia here, and I have a free gift for your soul. It's called Pathways. Pathways is our weekly email aimed at offering you soul-nourishing content for the journey. It contains readings, prayers, spiritual practices, a link to the Discerning Leader podcast, as well as information about all of our upcoming soul care retreats, workshops, and online offerings. So head on over to leadershiptransformations.org today and sign up for this free resource. It will help you slow down and be more. God bless you, friends.